The fourth and final part of my Werewolf Harry Potter videos is finally here. I took you through the life of the kindest and most well-known werewolf, Remus Lupin, discussed what would happen if two werewolves mated during the full moon, and discussed the entire history of werewolves in the series. And now for the final werewolf video, we're gonna take a look at the most evil werewolf in the Harry Potter series. He had a huge impact on the wizarding world, especially when it came to his own kind. Unfortunately, he wasn't very fleshed out in the movies. But not to worry, I'm going to explain Greyback's entire life from the books, and on top of that, more info that we got after the book series ended. Before we start, however, I get a lot of comments saying that my editing skills are really good and are top notch, and many people ask how I have such top notch quality week after week. And the best answer I can give for that is constant practice and learning, and the best tool that I have at my disposal is Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community that has thousands of classes covering all different kinds of creative skills. I've gone through countless classes that are normally around 30 minutes each, and it taught me how to use so many different programs to make my videos. Skillshare has so many different lessons you can take, not just for video editing, but things like cooking, business, the business part actually helping me turn my YouTube channel into an official trademark company. You could study marketing, finance, music, writing being another one of my favorite parts of Skillshare. And right now, I'm really excited to announce that we're partnering with them. And if you go down to the link below, you get a 2-month free trial. With the free trial, you'll get premium unlimited access to join the classes and communities that are right for you. Skillshare is also incredibly affordable, so after the free trial is up, you'll pay under $10 a month. If you want to perfect your craft or find a new hobby or even start a business, check out Skillshare today. Alright, now let's get this video started. Fenrir Greyback was born around the 1940s, and at a young age, he was bitten by a werewolf. Even though he was young, he still survived because of his magical blood, which could handle a bite much better than Muggle blood. Greyback was infected with lycanthropy, the disease that every bite victim gets. The disease forces the wizard infected to turn from a man to a vicious werewolf every month during the full moon. The transition is extremely painful, and when turned, it makes them lose all sense of right and wrong, and makes them have no control over themselves. The Ministry of Magic werewolf laws that every werewolf had to sign the Werewolf Code of Conduct and promise not to hurt anybody, but rather to lock themselves up securely every month during the full moon. Greyback refused to do this, however, because he was angry that he had been bitten, angry that he had to turn into a werewolf every month for the rest of his life. But then, he realized this wasn't a curse, but it was a gift to give him power and to become a leader. He was furious with the ministry and with those wizards who looked down upon him because of his disease. His one and only goal in life quickly became to get revenge, and he did this by infecting as many people as possible, and he went on to recruit as many werewolves as he could to one day lead them to take over and dominate the entire wizarding world. His main targets were children, so he could recruit them young. Children were his specialty. He would oftentimes say, bite them young, raise them away from their parents, and raise them to hate normal wizards. Greyback would ensure that they had nowhere to go in life because of their lycanthropy, and would make them realize that the only thing to do was to join his army. What started off as just a few werewolves that were part of a gang, or a pack, turned into a giant underground society of werewolves that were full of hatred for the wizarding world for shunning them, banning them, and hating on them. Greyback perfected his craft of infecting people. When it was close to the full moon, he would oftentimes keep himself near the victims he had picked out for that month, so that when he did turn, he would be right next to them. As time went on, however, he became more and more greedy with his victims, his lust for attacking people happening all year round rather than just once a month. He began attacking people when he was in his human form, and to cause the most damage, he kept his nails and teeth sharp and pointy, making it easy to disfigure someone's face or scar their body. Though he wasn't in his werewolf state, the scratches he gave as a man were not ordinary scratches that a human could give, but rather were lasting scars that would never go away and never fully heal. Around the 1960s, the amount of dark magical activity across the country was increasing steadily. While few yet knew what lay behind the mounting attacks and sightings, Lord Voldemort's first ascent to power was in progress, and Death Eaters, Voldemort's followers, were recruiting all kinds of dark creatures to join them in their quest to overthrow the Ministry of Magic, the same quest that Greyback had, though on different terms. Voldemort wanted to overthrow the Ministry for power, but Greyback wanted to overthrow it for revenge, and he planned to do this with his army of werewolves, and this included ruling over Voldemort and his Death Eaters, though at the time, Greyback knew his army was not powerful enough to be able to do this. However, when Voldemort promised that he and his pack of werewolves would have a huge amount of victims to go after, Greyback led his underground society and his army to join Voldemort's cause, not because he believed in Voldemort's cause, but because by allying himself with Voldemort would give him greater access to potential victims, and therefore Voldemort would grow his personal army of werewolves, getting him closer to his goal of leading his own society to overthrow the Ministry themselves. Voldemort wasn't stupid though. He knew exactly what Greyback's intentions were, and because of this, he did not allow Greyback or his army to be proper Death Eaters. They were not granted the dark mark on their arm, they weren't allowed to have Death Eater robes, and they were looked down upon by all the other Death Eaters. Voldemort, however, knew that allowing Greyback to fight with him would give him a huge advantage, and that's why he allowed Greyback to be a part of his cause. All the Death Eaters used Greyback and his army of werewolves as a common threat to those who tried to cross them or who got in their way. They would tell them that if they did not cooperate, they would send Greyback after their family and their loved ones, and this happened many times. The Death Eaters threatening people doubled the amount of victims Greyback got, and he especially loved when the family had kids. During one of Greyback's attacks, this one out of lust for killing rather than being used as a threat by Death Eaters, he went after 2 Muggle children, and because Muggles could not survive a werewolf attack the way wizards could, both children died. The Ministry was alerted to their deaths, and they found Greyback at the scene of the crime. Greyback, however, thought fast on his feet, and acted as though he was just a Muggle tramp who had witnessed these 2 children being attacked by a werewolf, something that he acted as though was completely foreign and crazy to him, as he had never heard of the wizarding world or known that werewolves were real. Those who came to the scene of the crime brought Greyback to the Ministry to question him on what he had seen, still believing that he was a Muggle. Greyback played his part well, and acted as though he was utterly amazed to find himself in a room full of wizards, and acted as though he was horrified by the talk of the poor dead children. Because of his expert lying, his filthy clothing, and the fact that he did not have a wand with him, he was able to convince the questioning committee that he was telling the truth, but one member in the committee did not believe his story. Lyle Lupin called him out, saying that there were telltale signs in his appearance and behavior that he was in fact the werewolf that killed them, and Lupin proposed that they keep him locked up until the next full moon that was a mere 24 hours away. Greyback sat in silence while Lyle was laughed at by his fellow committee members, and Lyle got angry, saying that werewolves were soulless and evil and deserved nothing but death, something that made Greyback incredibly angry. Greyback, however, kept his cool and continued to play the part of the Muggle tramp well. After Lyle was kicked out of the room, the head of the committee apologized to Greyback and they released him. When the wizard escorted Greyback out, he intended to place a memory charm on him to ensure that this Muggle would forget ever seeing the wizarding world. But before he had a chance to do so, Greyback had 2 accomplices part of his underground pack stand at the entrance, and the 3 werewolves overpowered the wizard and fled. Greyback still having his memory of the events that had just gone down, the events that made him incredibly angry. Greyback lost no time in sharing with his werewolf followers how Lyle Lupin had described them as evil, soulless creatures who deserved nothing but death. They planned to get revenge on this wizard, and it would be swift and terrible. Knowing that Lyle Lupin had a 4-year-old son, Greyback went to Lyle's house and did as he always did. He got close to them so that when he turned into his werewolf form in a few hours, he would have his victims right there. In his werewolf form, he opened the boy's window and attacked the boy named Remus. Greyback was so furious that he began to take it too far, actually killing the boy. But before he finished the boy off, Lyle came in and shot a number of powerful curses to get Greyback to flee. Greyback had done what he wanted to do, however. He turned Lyle Lupin's son into a fully fledged werewolf. As the Wizarding War waged on and grew even more fierce, so did Greyback, who eventually became so known for his savage villainy that the Ministry of Magic placed him on the most wanted list, and his poster was plastered all over. This led to him having to be more careful, and he ended up staying underground, but he ensured that his quest of building a werewolf army was still met, as he sent many of his werewolf minions to continue to infect as many people as possible, many of the attacks being threats that the Death Eaters had set up. Everything changed, however, when Lord Voldemort fell at the hands of Harry Potter. Greyback did not necessarily care that he fell, but he did care that his main source for bite victims was now gone. Nevertheless, he was one of the many who did not try to find and revive the Dark Lord because he believed him finished. Even with the Dark Lord gone, Greyback continued his quest regardless, and he continued to infect as many witches and wizards as he could, especially children. But without Voldemort providing more victims, the numbers he had once seen were no longer possible. Greyback had many run-ins with the Werewolf Capture Unit from the Ministry's Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, and while they would manage to capture him on several occasions, they could never hold him for very long before he escaped and was at large again. In the 1980s, Greyback and his army attacked Hogwarts School. He and 2 other werewolves emerged from the Forbidden Forest and easily took down a student who tried to stop them named Chiara Laboska, though they did not bite her because she herself was already a werewolf. Before Greyback could figure out his plan of assault, however, he caught the scent of the headmaster, Albus Dumbledore, and fearing the powerful wizard, he and his werewolf accomplices retreated. The next full moon, Greyback, who was not turned yet, and the same 2 accomplices attacked Hogwarts again, but this time Hogwarts was ready. Dumbledore had called the Ministry ministry, and they sent Cecil Lee from the werewolf capture unit. During the confrontation, Cecil tried to go after Greyback's accomplices, but he failed and became surrounded by them. While his werewolf accomplices had Cecil surrounded, Greyback finally turned, but before he could do anything, he was confronted by Chiara, the werewolf student who was in her werewolf form as well. When she went after him, however, Greyback knocked her unconscious, but he was then held at bay by some other students. Cecil fought off the two werewolves, and they retreated to their leader Greyback's side. Cecil then swiftly stepped forward and conjured ropes from the end of his wand to restrain Greyback, and he took him and his accomplices to the ministry. Unsurprisingly, Greyback once again escaped, but while he was locked up, he lost a huge number of his werewolf army, forcing him to keep his head low for a while. Greyback lost much of his power now that a lot of his army was locked up, and he unfortunately no longer had the resources to free them. He kept a low profile until 1995 when Voldemort made his return. Voldemort put together a prison break from Azkaban, and many of Greyback's followers got released as well, Voldemort intending to recruit the werewolves to his side again. When Greyback was approached by the Dark Lord, he joined him once again, eager to have endless bite victims again so he could build his own army. This time around, Voldemort allowed Greyback to wear Death Eater robes, but he was still not granted to have the dark mark on his arm. Greyback's forces grew more than ever, especially after Umbridge's anti-werewolf legislation was passed, making it almost impossible for any werewolf to get a job, leading to many of them to fall into poverty. They wanted a better life, and were promised this if they joined Greyback and Voldemort. Greyback played a much larger role in the Half-Blood Prince film than in the book, and though the films aren't canon to the source material, as I've talked about in past videos, I feel some of the things the films added were worth mentioning, especially the fact that he was among the Death Eaters who kidnapped Ollivander from his shop on Voldemort's orders, and that he was among those that took down the bridge. Greyback later worked with the newly inducted Death Eater, Draco Malfoy. Malfoy threatened Borgin, one of the owners of Borgin and Burke's shop, saying that Greyback was a family friend, and that he would drop by from time to time to make sure Borgin was living up to his agreement. Malfoy told Borgin to tend to the vanishing cabinet in the shop so that Draco could use it to transport Death Eaters to Hogwarts. Greyback did just as Malfoy had instructed, and came into the shop from time to time, intimidating and terrifying the shop owner. During the events of the school year in the Half-Blood Prince, Greyback was sent after the Montgomery family after their mother refused to help the Death Eaters. The family had 3 kids, 2 daughters who were enrolled in Hogwarts, and a 5-year-old son who lived with his parents. When Greyback was sent after them, he targeted the 5-year-old boy, and as he attacked, he got carried away. After he fled, the boy was taken to St. Mungo's, and the bites that Greyback had given him were so severe that the boy died shortly after being brought in. At the end of the school year, Greyback and a few other Death Eaters went to Borgin and Burke's, and they were transported from the vanishing cabinet in the shop to the vanishing cabinet at Hogwarts. Draco did not intend for Greyback to come, however, not wanting to put other students and his friends in danger, knowing that Greyback was vicious toward children. As they made their way through the school, the Death Eaters and Greyback fought Dumbledore's army and part of the Order of the Phoenix. In the chaos, Greyback took Bill Weasley down and mauled his face with his nails and teeth. By the time he was done with him, Bill's face was unrecognizable. It was so badly slashed and ripped that he looked grotesque. Greyback, proud of what he had done, stepped over his victim's body and moved on. Eventually, they made their way to Dumbledore, who Draco had cornered. When Greyback arrived, he asked Dumbledore if he was pleased to see him, which Dumbledore responded to saying no he was not. Greyback then grinned, showing his pointed teeth. Bill's blood trickled down his chin, and he licked his lips slowly and obscenely. A horrified and disgusted Dumbledore then said, "Am I to take it that you are attacking even without the full moon now? This is most unusual. You have developed a taste of human flesh that cannot be satisfied once a month?" Greyback then said that was right, and asked if this frightened Dumbledore, to which Dumbledore answered, saying that he could not pretend that this did not disgust him. "I wouldn't want to miss a trip to Hogwarts, Dumbledore, not when there are throats to be ripped out. Delicious. Delicious." Greyback then raised a yellow fingernail and picked at his front teeth, leering at Dumbledore, and said that he wanted to kill him too, but another Death Eater cut him off, saying that they had orders, and that Draco was the one that had to kill him. Snape ended up being the one to do it, however, and they all fled Hogwarts. Bill was left with scars all over his face, scars that would never heal. He did not turn into a werewolf, however, because Greyback was not in his wolfish form. When the Ministry of Magic fell, and Voldemort and his Death Eaters had infiltrated the government, Greyback had more victims than he could have ever imagined. He ended up working for the new ministry controlled by Voldemort, as he became a primary leader in the Snatchers organization. He led a group of Snatchers around the countryside, scouting for fugitive Muggleborns, blood traders, and truants who had escaped persecution, hoping to trade them to the ministry for gold. In the films, Scabier was the person in charge of this group, but in the books, it was Greyback. Many of Greyback's parts in the books were also given to Scabier in the films. It was was Greyback's Snatcher unit that tracked down a fugitive group comprised of Dirk Cresswell, Ted Tonks, Dean Thomas, and goblins Griphook and Gornuk. Dean and Griphook were captured, while Dirk, Ted, and Gornuk were murdered while resisting capture. Greyback's Snatcher unit was later brought to a campsite that Harry, Ron, and Hermione resided in after Harry said Voldemort's name, the name having a tracker on it, leading them right to them. When they got there, they captured the three of them, and Greyback said that Hermione looked delicious, her soft skin tantalizing him. Hermione had jinxed Harry's face to make it puffy so they would not recognize him, and as Greyback looked at him, he said that he would need Butterbeer to wash his ugly face down after he ate him. Greyback questioned the three of them, and when he got to Hermione, Scabier had to tell him to settle down so he wouldn't bite her. Greyback's group did not know who they actually were, but after finding a Daily Prophet article that had Hermione saying that she was traveling with Harry Potter, they recognized her and realized that this boy might be Harry Potter. The thing that made them sure of it, however, was them finding Harry's glasses, and Greyback screamed out, "We've got Potter!" Greyback told them to hell with the Ministry, as they would take the credit, and said that they were taking him straight to the Dark Lord. Scabier asked Greyback if he would summon him, but Greyback angrily said no, because he did not have the Dark Mark. But Greyback knew that Voldemort was using Malfoy Manor as his base, and they brought them there. Greyback was hoping to receive the 200,000 galleon reward for capturing Potter, and hoped that on top of that, they would gift him Hermione so he could eat her. When they got there, however, Bellatrix spotted Godric Gryffindor's sword among the captive's possessions, and became frantic. She took all the Snatchers down except Greyback, and she forced him to a kneeling position, forcing his arms to outstretch with the sword. She took it and released him, and though he was angry, Greyback was too wary to approach her again. Bellatrix ordered Greyback to lock the others up while she questioned Hermione, and as he did so, he mocked Ron, asking him if he thought Bellatrix would let him have the leftovers of his girlfriend when she was done with her. After Bellatrix tortured Hermione, she told Greyback that he could have her, but Harry and Ron entered before he had the chance. A fight broke out, and when Dobby dropped the chandelier, Harry took his chance, aiming all three of the wands in his hand at Greyback and stupefied him. Greyback was lifted off his feet by the triple spell and flew up to the ceiling and then smashed to the ground. When he awoke, he and the others in Malfoy Manor had to fear the wrath of the furious Voldemort after letting Harry escape. A few months later, Greyback was present for the Battle of Hogwarts, and he led his werewolf army, fighting by Voldemort's side. During the battle, Greyback pounced onto the girl and sank his teeth into lavender brown. Hermione, seeing this, shot Greyback backwards, and he hit the marble banister and struggled to return to his feet. Then with a bright white flash and a crack, Trelawney dropped the crystal ball on his head, and he crumpled to the ground and did not move. He later got up though, but in the last few minutes of the battle, Ron and Neville worked together to bring Greyback to the ground. After Harry defeated Voldemort and the battle was finally over, Greyback was sentenced to life in Azkaban, and as were many of his werewolf accomplices, and this time, he was unable to escape. Greyback was a truly evil and sick person, probably more so than many of the villains in the series. He took pleasure in killing and maiming, and enjoyed it so much that he became cannibalistic, eating people even in his human form. The fact that he had a fetish for eating and biting children though, is really what makes him stand out from the other villains in the series. Azkaban might have been too small a punishment for the horrific acts he committed, but I think the entire Wizarding World could sleep better knowing that this monster was locked up for good. Thank you so much for watching, guys. You can follow me on social media to see more of my personal life and see more of this little dude. You can follow me on Twitter and Facebook for Movie Flame updates. And I want to give a huge shout out to all my patrons listed below. If you want to be featured in the next video, plus get a bunch of other rewards, become a patron today. Again, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you press that like button and subscribe, and look out for more great videos on the way.